And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our special author and guest is Carrie Gress, PhD, author of The Auntie Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity, published by TAN Publishers, available through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. It's very good to see you again.
Thank you. It's
nice to have you here. People see you on various programs, Jeanette's program, of course, and we've spoken a couple of times here and also at the CMN. I remember we had a conversation as well. So the latest book, The Auntie Mary Exposed, why is there an Auntie Mary issue in the world today? And were you surprised that it existed?
I think we all know it exists, but I think I was able to put my finger on it in a slightly different way. When I was writing the Marion option, it's really struck me looking at who Our Lady is and the history of Our Lady and devotion to her and attributes of her, and contrasting that with the elite women of our culture. It became really stark and glaring that there's a big chasm between the two of them. And it's not even just that these women have sort of gone the secular route, but in fact, some of the characteristics of these women are diametrically opposed to who Our Lady is. So that's what really started me thinking about this.
Well, you say in the beginning, women have been a mystery since Adam encountered Eve. Why are they such a mystery? I know they're a mystery to men. Are they a mystery to women too?
Yes. I think we're deeply complex, and there's a lot of emotional things going on, and yeah, I think we're mysterious. But I think what we've seen in the culture over the last 50 or 60 years has become kind of monolithic in terms of the way that women are treated and are expected to behave. And it's definitely targeting some very specific things like our virginity and our motherhood. And Our Lady, of course, is the Virgin Mother, so it makes sense that there's a very specific attack going on Our Lady and on women too. I mean, I think Satan knows that if he gets women, he gets everybody. We saw this in the garden, and I think this is what we're seeing today.
Men live in constant state of shadow boxing, trying to stay in sync with the new progressive demands of women. Most of us, however, don't know the full story of the battle lines drawn in the 60s. Now, I hate to say I lived through it, so I remember some of these people. So Kate Millett and Betty Friedan and names like that, and Gloria Steinem are not unfamiliar. So you're yourself, I mean, you're kind of going back a little bit before your time. Were you surprised at these roots?
I was, because you know, my degree is in philosophy, and I kept trying to figure out what the philosophical foundations of feminism were. I kept looking for some real roots there. And I was surprised because I kept running into two things. One was Marxism, and the other was the occult.
That's very interesting. That was probably the biggest surprise. I mean, I can kind of understand the occult side with Our Lady and demonic, and you know, the enmity between the devil and but the Marxist aspect, I was a little surprised at that.
Yeah, that was an interesting piece to put together, because of course Our Lady of Fatima in 1917 predicts that Russia will spread her airs. So if you, and most people think of this in very economic terms or social terms, but not in terms of women per se. And I think that if you look at what the Soviet program was, it was to create this new man and this new woman and this kind of utopia. And so they employed a lot of the things that we ended up adopting, you know, 50 years later, 30 or 40 years later, things like abortion on demand, divorce on demand, these kinds of realities. And you know, the Russians were saddled by this, by an outside kind of ideological aggressor, whereas we took these ideas on, but it was done by the women, it was done by modern media, it was done by very attractive women who were very savvy. So we kind of absorbed them without really considering, you know, it was passed on to us through
the
Cosmopolitan.
Girl,
exactly.
The Cosmo Girl,
yeah, people weren't reading Marx, they were reading Cosmo, and they were getting kind of the same set of lies, which of course is that that children are our obstacle, that men are supposed to be the enemy and the family is really the enemy.
We talk about here, or there's a quote about they wanted to be a doctor, lawyer, judge, even a high-priced call girl, but there were two things that she could not be if she was going to be glamorous, sophisticated, and cool. That's a virgin or a mother. Right,
yeah. No, Cosmopolitan would not publish stories about the Cosmo woman who was a virgin or a mother. And
in fact, they would make stories up based on what it says here, right?
No, they definitely fabricated stories. and made them sound as as venturous and wonderful as they could, and it led to the destruction of so many women who believed these stories and thought this was really the way to go, was the Cosmo life. And
right, it's kind of what we see with the Facebook world in some cases with people today, where they're looking at these Facebook stories as if they're real,
right,
and thinking their life is so boring and terrible,
right,
not realizing how much of
Instagram
it is a charade.
Right, yeah. No, there's certainly plenty of that. So the envy and the holding up other women is very glamorous, and having the ideal life is certainly nothing new.
That's a really good point, and you talk about envy in here quite a bit. That whole idea, in a sense, of our society of creating envy, of selling envy.
Right, yeah. No, and I think, as you know, the church, we haven't done a great job of reminding women that this is something that we struggle with from the very beginning. I mean, look at how Eve is tempted, like, God has more for you. And so we always sort of tend to want more, to, this overreach for stuff and notoriety and celebrity, and, the list goes on and on. And so I think that really is at the heart of this, is what's being sold. But also at the same time, what's been dropped, of course, is the antidote to envy, which is, of course, the relationship with God, and that piece has certainly been dropped off from the feminist agenda.
Now, you talk about the second wave feminism made it clear that children were the enemy, preventing women from fulfilling their dreams. So, what's the difference between the first wave and the second wave?
Well, the first wave started more with sort of the suffragettes, and it was an earlier iteration. The second wave came along and said, things like Gloria Steinem, you can have it all. And Germaine Greer saying things like children don't need to raise themselves, they'll just be brought up, and not really understanding the nature of children and babies and human development. But what really brought the second wave together, even though you have someone like Helen Gurley Brown, who runs Cosmo magazine, as opposed to someone like Kate Millett, who's super academic, and had very divergent ideas about women, what they were brought together by was this notion of abortion, that we had to have abortion. And that's what was really the glue to the movement.
That's the key to freedom.
That is the key to freedom, because children are just getting in the way, is the fundamental lie.
Upon reflection, seeing the demonic source behind the geopolitical death and destruction of the last century is relatively easy, but there is similarly a uniquely malevolent source promoting abortion, and the new behavior women have fallen into, wittingly or not. You go on to say there must be something more than simple human vice behind the fact that millions of women have betrayed the most sacred and fundamental of relationships, that of mother and child.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is I think if you look at all of history, this is an absolutely astounding point. If you see, certainly abortions have happened in the past, I'm not trying to make that claim, but to have a whole culture not only think that abortion is necessary, but go further and say, we're shouting our abortion, we're celebrating our abortion. This is something there's something deeply diabolical about this, that this most fundamental of relationships could be so twisted and become so, seen as such a bad thing in the minds of millions and millions of women.
What's an anti-Marion spell?
I think this is really the spirit of the anti-Mary. I don't mean that as an individual. I mean it as a spirit that sort of captured the culture. And I think this sort of spell is something that the culture has really been taken over by, that we are influenced by without even really realizing it, because it's so deeply in our politics, magazines, books, Hollywood, academics, fashion industry. All of it is sort of shot through with the same ideology, again, revolving around abortion as the lodestone.
You say 2 years of research have provided story after story of the terrible things women are doing to themselves and to their husbands, children, and grandchildren. Are you being tough on them?
No, I don't think I'm being tough on them at all. I think that, there were so many stories that I ran across, just horrifying things of just the different child abuse. I mean, not to mention, of course, abortion, but just the different ways in which people are being treated. So, no, I don't think I'm being hard on them at all. I think if you look in just even an everyday news feed, you're going to see the effects of the anti-Mary.
Erasing Mary, that's the chapter, and you quote Karol Wojtyła from '78, then, of course, St. John Paul II. We're now facing the final confrontation with the church and the anti-church, of the gospel versus the anti-gospel, and that's where you go on and you connect the idea. If you comprehend that, adding the idea of the Auntie Mary to this list makes sense for several reasons.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the direction that women have gone, and if you look at the way the whole culture has swung, again, because of this Marxist and occult combination, that it makes sense to see it's really not the best of our human nature that's being presented, but in fact there's some deeply troubling issues that we need to start sorting out and fighting back against.
You also go on to say, Mary's place in the order of grace also elevates her significance in direct battle with demons. When commanded by priests during exorcisms, demons testify to the rage they feel toward Mary, a mere human with such an exalted position. And I know, and you talk about it because you have some exorcists quoted in the book, but I've heard it elsewhere that they say the greatest weapon against a demon in an exorcism is Our Lady. But I hadn't really connected with the idea of their rage would be because she's an exalted human, which is really goes back to the original fall, really.
Yeah.
In the sense of the angels.
Exactly. That they're supposed to be ontologically superior, and yet she's just a mere human. So, absolutely.
Now, you asked the question, and I'll ask you this. If there indeed is an anti-Marian spirit, what might it look like? What does it look like?
I think you turn on your TV. All you have to do is look at some of these protests that are going on. Usually there's a lot of nudity, really angry women who don't look like women used to look, or should look, or can
actually look like.
Right, exactly. I think it's also women that reject motherhood, that reject their own biology. I mean, just contraception is one of those things where you actually have to reject the natural functioning of your own body. So I think it's all of these elements tied up together that really it makes up what the anti-Marian spirit looks like.
You said women are not getting happier, just more medicated.
Yeah, if you look at any of the metrics for women today, suicide numbers, depression levels, drug abuse, divorce rates, all of these things are pointing to the fact that women are not happier. And you would think that feminism is something that is actually better for us, that there would be sort of a gradual progression towards happiness, and yet we're not seeing that at all. And of course, they make the argument, well, we just don't have enough of it yet.
There's always, we haven't drank enough poison.
Yes, exactly.
That's the answer to everything.
We got to get over that hump.
Right.
And yet it's clearly we're going the other direction.
And you quoted the late Cato Byrne, it can be no accident that we're witnessing unprecedented emotional and mental trauma and brokenness in every segment of our population because motherhood has been so devalued and neglected. And then you go on to the quote here that says, and we have this partly because the equality feminists force us to believe that motherhood was parasitic and the housewife a leech. Yeah.
No, that's kind of a tight explanation of it, but that in fact is actually what has happened. And just the way we consider mothers, even now, I'm expecting my 5th child, and I'm amazed at the reactions I get from people that are, you think people could just say congratulations, and yet that's usually not the response I get.
Is the issue because of how many you've already had, or?
Yeah, it's generally that. I mean, it's a 5th child. If it were my 1st or 2nd, then maybe
then
I would
okay.
get,
2 is kind of the max.
2 is acceptable.
Maybe 1.5 is allowed.
Yeah. But the presumption is, of course, is that if you're home with your children because you're too stupid to do anything else, that you couldn't possibly do anything else, so you must be staying home. And I think that is a direct result from the feminist movement and the rhetoric of it, that you just can't figure out your own career, so you might as well stay home and let your husband pay for your life.
There you go. Sadly, few in our culture know that they owe a debt of gratitude to Catholicism for the notion that women are equal to men. That's one of the things you see a lot of times is this kind of jettisoning Christianity and Catholicism without realizing that all this equality and fraternity really comes from the church.
No, that's exactly right. And certainly it started with Christ, but it really came to a full development through Our Lady and devotion to her and coming to understand who she is. So, I think that's just one of the amazing bits is like, you don't realize this didn't come from Islam, this didn't come from Hindu religion, Buddhism, anything, Greek secularism. It all has come truly through Catholicism.
Right. Deep in the heart of most women is the desire to want more. Then you say, problems arise, however, when women use their vices rather than their virtues to get what they want or need. What is that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think fundamentally, women have been created physically weaker. We also, because we can have children, we're put in a position for, at least relatively 18 years, we're taking care of that child. And I think that there's something sort of inborn in us in a vicious kind of way, that we always are trying to find opportunities for ourselves and for our children. And that can be a virtue as well, that capacity to see the needs that others have, we can use that as a virtue. So looking at hospitals and these different ways that women have been able to improve the lives of others, orphanages and so on. So I think that there is this desire to acquire, but we also realize that we can manipulate, we can seduce, we can do all kinds of things to get what we want without getting it in a way that's in accord with our virtues. That we certainly see plenty of that.
In Satan's point of entry, you say women operate on a fundamentally egalitarian model. Now that sounds good, but you say a large percentage of women, according to this Benison report, will not help female subordinates unless there is some sort of quid pro quo, perhaps fearing that her own position would be threatened by a rising colleague. This egalitarian model is very different from the hierarchical model evidenced among men. Well, on the surface, you would think, well, the egalitarian one's definitely better.
You would think. Yeah, when everybody has to say the same level, it usually doesn't work out very well. And that's, again, a vicious response. I think that, but that is part and parcel of just kind of the way that women are hardwired. That there's a certain amount of jealousy and envy that are created when, say one of your peers does better than you. And I think, there's a lot to be said for just understanding how the female mind works. And I speak of this book, Warriors versus Worriers, a lot in the Anti-Marriage. It's this written by a sociologist, and it was published by Oxford University Press. And I keep wondering, do they know what's in this book? Because it's completely politically incorrect, and it just has a lot of really incredible ideas for helping men understand, why they're struggling either with their wife or someone in the workplace or a daughter, and vice versa. And even for women to understand, what's going on? Why am I having such a hard time working with this other woman, or all these different struggles that we face in interpersonal relationships.
Right. Because envy is such a commonplace vice, it isn't surprising to see the role it plays in radical feminism. But what is most curious to see the similarities between it and the pattern of fairy tales whose plots are dripping with vice. That was a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at fairy tales, it's kind of a similar pattern. You've got sort of the older woman who's being threatened by the upstart. The younger, beautiful, newer version of herself. And so that's where we end up with a lot of just these stories are great for telling us, like, unless we sort of rein these vices in, we end up becoming that witch. That we need to use our virtues and become wise and grow in that way, instead of becoming the evil witch who's trying to poison the young woman.
I hope this isn't an indelicate segue. Speaking of motherhood, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "Motherly love ain't everything it's been cracked up to be."
Yeah, I think Justice Ginsburg has made some pretty outlandish comments about motherhood, and clearly has not very high regard for it, has certainly made that clear.
It's interesting, too. You say one of the more telling trends of our day is the continued fixation even liberated women have with royalty and the ideal of being a princess.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. You look at pages like Town and Country or The Cut or different online magazines that women read, and you can find huge amounts of information that's absolutely just enamored of the lives of royalty. And you would think that would be the first thing to go, of course, because isn't that some kind of old patriarchy and chivalry and all those things that they're supposed to be against, but somehow it captures their imagination.
You also talk about Lilith in here.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one in a while. It used to be these Lilith fair kind of things like that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I first started paying attention to it. Like, why does this name keep coming up? And was Lilith Fair, as you mentioned, and then after Hurricane Harvey in Houston, there was this fund set up for women who wanted abortions for free, and it was called the Lilith Fund. So I thought, well, who is this individual? And it turns out that it's a mythological character that has her story predates our scriptures. She's mentioned in the book of Isaiah, but she basically, her operation is to seduce men and kill children, and it just seemed like such a striking example of what really happened in the 60s in terms of abortion and just the way that women were expected that they ought to be able to behave. But she's interesting because she's even the word lullaby is Arabic for to protect against Lilith. So there was a sense, and I've talked to an exorcist about it, that says she's one of the top demons, hardest to exorcise, but also fascinating because demons are genderless, but when they manifest themselves, they usually manifest as men. But Lilith is one that will, depending on who it's trying to trick, will manifest itself as a woman. So Lilith is something that it's also a lot in lesbian literature, and it is very is a very common individual because she's supposed to be the one that sort of beats down the patriarchy and wasn't conquered by it. So that's a very influential demon
in the big lie, changing human nature. I think this is important in general for what we hear about today. Radical feminism regularly promotes the idea that nature can be changed. That lie, which celebrates proclaiming that gender equality is the emergency of our time and must be addressed with frantic urgency, and that's where we get into the whole gender issues we're talking about today, right?
No, if we didn't have this sense that our nature could be changed, going back to the 1960s again, both chemically and otherwise, we would never have gotten to the stage that we have with the LGBT movement, because people just psychologically wouldn't be able to go there. But because of the fact that we think that of this human nature in plastic terms now, this is why we've reached that stage in the culture. Right.
In the Auntie and Marion architects, you have different people, Betty Friedan, Phyllis Chesler, who I'm not as familiar with, but explains that founded Intoxicating, talked about the time. Radical feminist ideas and activism were a bit like LSD. So many women became high at the same time that suddenly the world became psychedelically clear and all the lost girls found ourselves and each other.
Yeah, Chesler's fascinating. She's a psychologist. Has written maybe like 13 or 14 books, maybe more, I'm not sure. But her recent book came out, Politically Incorrect Feminism, and she really describes, it was a great help to me because she describes all of these women that were involved in it and pinpoints the fact that they had major issues with their parents. Most of these women had issues with their mothers in particular.
Right.
And they were broken women who never had that kind of love that they needed from their own mother. And so then when they got to this point where they found each other, and they were sort of like you just read, they were these lost girls that finally found a home. But not only did they find that, but they found this ideology that they could promote. They found the media. They found all these different ways to express themselves, so they became celebrities very, very quickly. And as broken people are wont to do, they broke other people. So, this wasn't coming from some sort of healthy place. It was really coming from a lot of incredibly broken women who didn't recognize. And even Chesler, to this day, she never makes it clear that this brokenness was problematic. She actually speaks of it sort of in a positive way, making it sound like it was somehow this great push for
it's when health. People listen to these people who are on television or celebrities, and you have no idea what kind of upbringing or lifestyle they're leading, and they're listening to these people. Another point you make elsewhere in the book towards the back was the idea of even, and I've seen it as well, it's like a woman is in a sense like Superman. Now, instead of women becoming, it's like what men are was bad, but instead of showing how not to be like that, they become like that. So now the strongest person on the television show who can beat up everybody is the woman. It doesn't even have to be a wonder. It can just be a regular woman who's has no problem throwing guys around the room.
No, this shows the brokenness intellectually of this effort, because the whole goal is to become exactly like men, but at the same time they hate men. They want men to change. So. And Gloria Steinem has drawn this out. She wrote a book shortly after she turned 80 talking about this, that the whole real goal was to sort of create this genderless society where it doesn't really matter one way or another, and everybody sort of has this fluid sexuality. And so yeah, she's drew out the conclusions, but yes, there's definitely this push-pull of we want to be like men, but we hate what men are.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's very schizophrenic.
Then we ape what the bad habits they have. The
Right.
Anti-Mary Exposed. Just before we go, you got another book that you co-authored, Theology of Home, Finding the Eternal in the Everyday.
Yeah.
A lot of pictures in here. What's the deal here?
You know, this is kind of the opposite side of the coin. I mean, this is Catholicism on defense. We're trying to explain what has happened with the culture and why the church is struggling in so many ways. But this is sort of Catholicism on offense. This is what it looks like to have a beautiful home. This is what it looks like when we really live out our faith. And I think the other reality is that, you know, there are a lot of women who will not read the Anti-Mary Exposed, but there are plenty of women who will read the other. And I've seen this a lot in terms of who's buying the book.
Okay.
That people don't read Marx and Sanger and change their life because of that. They read Cosmo and they listen to Beyonce. So I think we as Catholics need to do a better job of presenting beautiful content, but also giving it some beautiful, hearty ideas that people can actually flourish with instead of succumb to.
Well, it looks
the
like you've taken
anti-Mary.
some good steps
I'm working on it.
on both sides of the street. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Carrie Gress.
My pleasure.
PhD, author of The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, of course. We'll look for more programs from EWTN, of course, Bookmark coming soon. This is EWTN's Bookmark Show. I'm Doug Keck. We really appreciate you stopping by. See you next time.